I am at the remnants of the Birdsall Dam, which was the last dam, the last iteration of a dam on the North Fork of the American River that diverted water into the North Fork ditch. This dam, built in the 1880s, the flumes in the canal were the focal point of an 1898 lawsuit that, when the ruling finally came down, established the appropriative water rights for the North Fork ditch and the successor companies, San Juan Water District, and that translated into 33,000 acre feet when Folsom Dam was built. Hi, I'm Kevin Knaus. We're doing a little bit of history out here on the North Fork of the American River. So a little bit of background about these water canals. In 1851, 1852, Amos Catlin, a New York lawyer by trade, came to California in 1849, and he organized the Natoma Water and Mining Company that put a dam in on the South Fork of the American River above Salmon Falls and ran a water ditch down to Mormon Island, over to what would become Folsom and Outer Prairie City. In 1858, he acquired about 36,000 acres of the Leidesdorff land grant, which went up to, virtually Placer County and would encompass the Folsom area. But Amos was in demand because he had a successful water company. In 1854, he and some other men were requested to come up and look at the North Fork of the American River, and Amos organized the American River Water and Mining Company in 1854, 1855 to complete the North Fork ditch, a water ditch on the North Fork of the American River. And then in between 1855 and 1856, Amos was the superintendent of the North Fork ditch. So he had a lot of knowledge about building dams and water canals and the grade and the flow and everything. But his real passion was law. And he got out of the American River Water and Mining Company when he became an assemblyman in 1856. He kind of left the North Fork ditch. He was still a stockholder in both the North Fork ditch and the Natoma ditch, but he let the management go to other people. The Natoma ditch was more successful than the North Fork ditch. The North Fork, a lot more water, the floods were always coming in, ripping out the dam, tearing out the canals, because in this stretch, it was primarily a flume. So raging rivers would come and take out all of the wooden flumes. The American River Water and Mining Company sold the North Fork ditch in 1870, and for a couple years, it didn't even have water in it. Fast forward, Amos Catlin gets out of the Natoma Water and Mining Company and sells many of his shares to the Livermore family, who then take control of that, and they have designs for a much larger dam on the American River below the confluence, right where Folsom Prison was being built. And they started that in 1866. And it would take some time. Finally, in the 1880s, they got their dam up and running and building it higher and higher. And they were also putting in a very large canal. So when the dam was finished, the water was diverted into a canal that was 50 feet wide and 8 feet deep. And it carried the water 2.5 miles down into the town of Folsom, to the Folsom Power House, and the water was put through the generators to generate electricity. And they had that up and running in 1895. Actually, Amos Catlin was at the Grand Parade in Sacramento in 1895 when electricity came into the city from the Folsom Power House, and marveling at everything that was going on. As an attorney, Amos Catlin would represent the Natoma Company even after he sold all his shares and was no longer involved, then he would also get involved with the North Fork ditch. Now, in 1895, the North Fork ditch was looking to make improvements. They didn't have a lot of water sales to miners anymore because gold mining had, essentially petered out on the North Fork. There were some farms and ranches, but the new water sales were to the colonies of Orangevale and Fair Oaks. And the North Fork ditch had a problem. From this Birdsall Dam here, all the way down to about essentially Beals Bar, or the right wing dam of Folsom Dam, is 25 miles, with the canal going back and forth. And to get enough water 25 miles from this dam, they had to run the canal very, very full. And there were always failures. And part of it had to do with just this construction of the North Fork ditch. And there was a lot of intrusions of rock and whatnot. So they undertook a course to really clean out the ditch. Starting in 1895, they hired 3 crews of Chinese men to just really start scouring out the North Fork ditch. It was all earthen, and there was no concrete lining or anything. Then a blasting crew came in, and at certain locations, they would blast out granite intrusions and smooth out the bottom. And then another crew would come in and clean it all out. Now, H.T. Knight, who was the chief engineer for the Folsom Power House, took note of these. He called it the enlargement of the North Fork ditch. And he took several reconnaissance missions up to the North Fork ditch to see what they were doing. He didn't work for them. He worked for the Natoma Company, or whatever it was called then. And he actually did some cross-sectional diagrams and whatnot because he was concerned that they may be taking more water. And in 1897, it was a very dry year, and there just wasn't a lot of water coming down either the North or the South Forks of the American River. The Natoma Dam was diverting 3,000 inches of water. The North Fork ditch was diverting about 3,000 inches of water. Now, when I say inches, at the time, most water in terms of volume was described in a miner's inch. How much water would pass through a 1-inch square hole with either 4 inches of water above that hole or 6 inches. And during that drought of 1897, it was estimated that only 175 cubic feet per second were flowing from the dam next to Folsom Prison into the canal down to the powerhouse. The powerhouse for full operation needed 85,000 cubic feet per minute. So they couldn't run all of their turbines. And the people at the Folsom Power House were just absolutely convinced that the North Fork ditch was taking too much water. And because they had to tell some of their electrical customers to shut off power because they just couldn't generate enough. Matter of fact, the American River was dry for a couple weeks between the dam at Folsom Prison and the discharge at the Folsom Power House. That's how bad it was. There was no water flowing over that dam. So the company that was kind of owned all of the Folsom Power House, the Sacramento Electric, Gas, and Railway Company, commenced a lawsuit against the owners of the North Fork ditch. An interesting aspect of the trial was the number of people that had come to California early and saw the development of California and the different water projects. Now, representing the Sacramento Electric, Gas, and Railway Company was L.T. Hatfield. And interestingly enough, representing the owners for the North Fork ditch was Catlin, Shin, and Catlin. Amos Catlin, A.L. Shin, and his son, John Catlin. And Amos Catlin was 75 years old when this trial got underway in 1898. And he did most of the cross-examination of the witnesses that Mr. Hatfield, the attorney, brought to the stand. The primary witness for the Folsom Power House litigation was H.T. Knight. And he gave testimony that he came to California early on, and his first recollections and when he saw the North Fork Ditch was in 1856, when he crossed over from El Dorado County up to Placer County on his way to Auburn at the Oregon Bar ferry crossing, which is right just maybe half a mile down from where we're at right now. And he started working in water projects in 1856, and he helped design the dam, and he was just absolutely certain that the North Fork Ditch had increased the capacity by at least 100% from the original iteration of the first dam at Tamaroo Bar. Now, he had other people with him, and he kept notes. H.T. Knight kept notes of all the different blasting that they did. I mean, he must have had spies out there, because he listed all the different places and how long it was that the North Fork Ditch blasted out the ditch to improve it, or in his parlance, to enlarge it. A.P. Catlin comes on, makes an opening statement, and he propounds two questions to Judge Hughes, who was overseeing the trial. The first was the North Fork Ditch appropriating too much water in excess of the original appropriation that they made in 1854 from that Tamaroo Bar Dam? And would they be taking more in the future? To the first question, he answered no. And to the second question, Catlin said they will take more water if Fair Oaks and Orangevale needed it and demanded it. So Catlin actually read a deposition from Augustus T. Aerosmith, who was the president of the American River Water and Mining Company, then living back in New Jersey at the time, about his experience. And then A.L. Shin makes this request of Judge Hughes. He says, "Judge, I would like to put my co-counsel, A.P. Catlin, on the witness stand." The judge said, okay. Now, of course, Hatfield would get to cross-examine Catlin. And we have to remember that Amos Catlin at that time had been a Superior Court judge for 6 years. He was very well respected in Sacramento, and many people looked to his opinions. He argued before the California Supreme Court all the time, and he'd actually argued before the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1863. And so Amos goes on the stand, and he talks about building the ditch and his recollections that, you know, the earthen ditch was about 7 feet across, about 3 feet deep. The flumes were about 6 feet across and 3 feet deep, and how much flow was going through there. He estimated about 3,000 inches was being diverted. And then he gets into his water sales that he had when he was a superintendent, and Hatfield, objection. What do water sales have anything to do with this complaint? And Judge Hughes says, I'm going to deny that objection because it is immaterial, but it is history. So Amos got to continue talking about the early days. And so the transcript is very fascinating to read through because it gives a glimpse of this area back in 1855 and what was going on with the miners. Amos, like H.T. Knight and many of the other witnesses, would testify that through experience, they knew how much water was flowing through a ditch. They didn't take measurements, there was no floats, they just knew. That wouldn't pass the smell test today. Fortunately, the owners of the North Fork Ditch did bring in a civil engineer to make genuine calculations, and it was Stephen Kiefer, who was residing in Fair Oaks and was a civil engineer for the Fair Oaks colony. And unlike H.T. Knight, Kiefer made a lot of different measurements all the way along, and he had the advantage of making measurements when the ditch was full of water, and then they turned the water out so it was empty, and he could get in there and actually make, real physical measurements. And he concluded about a little over 3,000 inches was going through the head gates. And the head gates were very important because they had not changed since about 1880s when Birdsall built that dam. So the head gates, and those gates that they have sliders in them, then you open it up and the water goes into the ditch. And that width, there was 2 of them, and how high they could make them and everything, those hadn't changed. So even if they had enlarged the ditch, the head gates that allowed water into the ditch from behind Birdsall Dam hadn't changed. What was really interesting is that Kiefer, in his calculations, determined that the North Fork ditch was losing about 30% of its water to, some evaporation, but a lot of it was just seepage, and 20% was coming in the first 3 miles from the dam all the way down. So it was leaking a lot of water. He also noted that at the time, the Fair Oaks Colony, 1898, they were taking about 175 inches. Orangevale Colony was taking between 250 and 275 inches. And he also noted that miner's inches, there was kind of 2 standards in California. He used the standard where the measurement, the flow, was with a water height of 4 inches above that 1-inch square opening. Whereas Amos and Knight and many of the other witnesses, they were using a flow with a 6-inch height. Anyhow, Judge Hughes heard all of the evidence, and he came down. It was fairly quickly. He said, they're not really taking any more water, and they are entitled to 3,000 inches of water. And that was the court case and the ruling that stood. Now, when the Army Corps of Engineers began building Folsom Dam, and that would make the North Fork Ditch and the Birdsall Dam obsolete, they had to negotiate with the owners of the North Fork Ditch for their appropriative rights. And they settled on 33,000 acre feet of water, and that was derived from the initial ruling of 3,000 inches. So now you know how San Juan Water District has 33,000 acre feet of water, no charge, behind Folsom Dam to be used for their retail and wholesale customers. So if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. You can leave comments and questions down below. I have a more extensive write-up on my blog post. It's right here. And you can go there, because I did read through the transcript and I took notes and everything. And so then you can kind of see a little bit more of the details. And if you want images or anything, because this transcript is at the California State Library. So for History Along the North Fork of the American River, I'm Kevin Canals. You have a super day.